Good evening, everyone. How wonderful to see you all. I'm going to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. My name is Sue Grimmett. I have the joy and delight of being the parish priest in this place. It is my great privilege to welcome you and introduce to you Dr. John Chenoweth and the book that we are launching today, Sent, Reflections on Missions, Boarding School and Childhood. So much, I think, would be different for so many if we could learn that God doesn't want our sacrifice. This book is a collection of deeply personal stories told by missionary children, now grown, whose parents worked for the Overseas Missionary Fellowship. They are stories of anguish, of hope, of relationships and commitment, of pain and of struggle. But most of all, I found them deeply human stories, which reflect on how an unwavering commitment to a cause can play out in a life and the kind of God who would ask for a sacrifice. There are stories that will move you, even if you have never had a connection to a missionary organisation or have never been to boarding school, even perhaps if you've never been to church. This is because many kinds of loss and trauma that are described here are visited on human beings in so many ways, particularly when we get our theology wrong. As I read, I found myself reflecting on the commonality of human experience. One of the writers talks about the shame of feeling complicit in affirming publicly and repeatedly that which had actually harmed her. Others speak of the impact of the language of sin on a sensitive childhood spirit. Others talk about a pervading sense of never fitting in anywhere. Such experiences play out in different ways in the human story and in the history of the church. Yet in this collection we can, I think, find ways to understand better our own experiences and reflect back to the church the outworkings of theology that remains blind to a God of love and how this impacts on the most vulnerable. I think if we are prepared to look honestly and with courage, to lean in and listen well, I believe these stories can heal, and I think they will continue to speak to you long after you have finished reading them. We are going to hear some portions of the book, or a portion of the book, and I'm just going to check my notes to make sure I get the intro right. The book reading that we will hear is called 6 and 46 by Rachel, and I'm delighted to be welcoming the very talented Dr. Melissa Agnew to come and read for us.
Six and 46. In the Camerons, the sheets are cold and damp at night. This is what we notice the first night at Chifu, when the quiet settles over us, bigger than the jungle. The sound of the sniffling in the dark is a tiny sound. We are little creatures lost in a very large wood. And it is a very, very long way to the red button by the door. Later I do what Lisa tells me and put the bolster against my back so that it feels like Mum. Somewhere under the covers, inside my chest, I am bleeding. like a leech wound. There's more blood than I realise until later. What does it mean to be 6 and 46 at the same time? Nothing feels simple anymore. We are happy, sad all the time. The valley is often enchanted. There are Friday treats, brown sugar sandwiches, centipedes that turn into marbles, the sound of taxis speeding towards us in the dark. Sometimes Auntie Pauline even shares her toast. And there's a whole world in roots and red clay beneath the trees by the drive. These pleasures pierce us. I write home, I am very, 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 very happy at school and at play. The verys take up a lot of space. And plus, I almost believe it myself. The legends sustain us. We repeat them to each other when we can't sleep. For example, Gillian once made it all the way to the golf course in Tanarata, her face painted with coffee before they caught her. That's practically halfway down the hill. But what would they have done if one of us had made it all the way down the mountain? But instead, we come properly home to Singapore, happy enough to be nauseous, trailing empty grub boxes. We are kings and queens of the summer. We are laughing, we are golden. Fishing for guppies, eating roti just after sunrise at Taman Serasi. We have a secret club that dumps water on the Mission General Director's head. At night, we hear the taxis on Cluny Road, the hum of electricity in the wall behind the bed. The ceiling fan turns slowly, hovering like an old lady, blessing us with a benediction. All manner of things are, well. Mom is there again when we're sick. She hears us call from upstairs, even when we whisper. Dad puts his Limacol on a hanky for us when we have a fever. His hands are warm. Their room is the safest place in the whole world. I stand by the door at night, watching them sleep. I am guarding them like a dragon guards its treasure. The tiles are cool under my feet, and I smell the frangipanis. I am much older than they are. What will happen if Aslan ever tries to take off this dragon skin? One evening, Paul catches an atlas moth. It struggles, blind and restless in the net, until the powder comes off of its wings. That night, the name tags appear. I watch Mum sew one onto my red towel. I feel every pinprick as it goes through my own flesh. I start talking to myself. Don't count how many days are left. Make sure you smell the baby a lot so that you will remember what she smells like. Wake up very early because the days will pass more slowly then. Maybe if you lose your shoes, they won't be able to send you. How did there get to be two of me? One to talk and one to listen. One so big and one so tiny, she hardly takes up any space. They say that love is only as deep as the hole your sorrow digs. What happens when the sorrow digs a hole and you are too little to climb out. When the hole is deep and you are at the bottom, and all you can see are the vast branches of that ageless forest waving against the sky.
What happens when sorrow digs a hole and you are too little to climb out? It's very poignant. I'd like to invite you to welcome one of the storytellers of this book and one of the editors responsible for bringing this collection to us, and our author here tonight, Dr. John Chenoweth.
Okay, that was a fun start. I can't do anywhere near as well as Melissa has done, but can I say first, thank you all so much for coming. It means a great deal to me to know that there is perhaps a resonance in these stories that can speak to us all. And before I get going, I really want to say thank you to Sue and to the members of this church for seeing what we have written and understanding its significance and inviting us to launch here and putting so much work into it. Thank you very much indeed. So tonight's the official launch of our book with this rather forbidding title, Sent: Reflections on Missions, Boarding School and Childhood. We who wrote it hope that it not only is resonant with mission leaders and missionaries, but it raises questions that apply to all human beings, as Sue has said. Each one of us started as a single cell. Then we got neurons, and everything that makes us who we are, we have learned. So I guess the question I ask you to consider tonight is, what did you learn that has laid the tracks for your life, that you learnt so long ago that you can't even see the tracks? As one example, how do we learn what love is? We know now that we learn love from being loved, from being looked after, from having our needs met, from feeling the warmth of steady affection, from having someone to go to in pain. We learn how to attach to another human being by being attached ourselves to a consistent figure who looks after us. Psychologists have described a number of critical phases in child development that we all went through. And looking around, I think we probably worked out all right, most of us. But it is also true that if you miss out on a critical phase at the wrong time, you will never completely make up for that missing. So our book will tell you what happened to missionary kids who were sent by their parents to a boarding school from the age of 5, sometimes 6, sometimes 4. The book is a collection of 43 stories of the lives that followed being sent away, many for the whole duration of their education. I should just point out that there are 2 ways in which the education happened. Primary school was at Chifu School, which we've heard about the name already. But then at the end of grade 6, the primary school was completed, we graduated, and we were sent to our home countries, some to hostels, some to stay with relatives, as I was. and that's where secondary education was completed. Okay, back to the book. There have been lots of books about boarding school, good books. So why is our book different? Why did we go ahead and print it? We did it because our parents uniformly said that God had told them that we were to go away. God's work was urgent. Millions of souls were dying in originally China, where the mission started, but then right throughout Southeast Asia. And so putting children away enabled us to be educated, and we were well educated. It worked. And that meant that our parents were free to continue with saving souls. The mission had a motto, Jehovah Jireh, and it had many, many very wonderful stories of the way God had provided for the missionaries and for their children over the previous, by our stage, 100 years, or 80 years in China. And so we were told that God would protect us. And I remember my own parents. I'll come to that later. Let's stay with the broad picture. Abraham has been honoured for generations for his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac when God told him to do so. Abraham showed his willingness to sacrifice Isaac, been waiting all his life for Isaac to be born, and he put him on the altar preparing to kill him. Once Abraham had showed his willingness, God intervened and provided a substitute for the sacrifice. So this God doesn't want our occasional worship. He wants everything. That hymn, "All to Jesus I surrender," sums it up. So if this God wants us to have a good education away from our families, and he will look after us specially, what could go wrong? In 2014, 20 middle-aged graduates from our mission boarding school, Chifu, started to join together in the UK and Denmark. This was an international school. We had people from all over the mainly Anglo-Saxon world. This group soon established that there was a lot of pain buried in their togetherness. And a couple of members went out to visit Chifu again to try and deal with some of the scars. And one of them approached the mission in Singapore and said, "Guys, I think you might have a bit of a problem." In due course, the OMF sent out a formal letter of apology. And I got one out of the blue. They said that the decisions of past mission leaders may have caused damage, for which they apologised, and they invited us all to a conference in the grounds of the old school, now a conference centre, in the Cameron Highlands of Malaysia. As I said, it had been named Chifu School because the original Chifu School was in Chifu, which is in China, and it was formed in 1880. Can I tell you just an unscripted story about when the apology arrived at my home? Because I read it and I thought, well, that's odd. Chifu didn't affect me. I was fine. I've got resilience. It didn't worry me in the slightest. I was lucky. It was a great school. And then we had our family over for lunch that Sunday, and I read this letter to them, and I started crying. I thought, that's weird. Oh. The next week, my eldest son, Sam, hadn't been there the week before, and I said, "Sam, look at this letter." this is weird, isn't it? And as I read it to him, I started crying again. I better go to Chifu Reconsidered, which was the name of the conference. And that was in 2014. Out of 300 graduates, about 80 turned up. And there were two speakers, Ruth Van Rieken, who's a specialist in the term that's become famous through her books, Third Culture Kids, and Ulrika Ernvik, who's a family therapist. I remember the first night. I'd gone out with Wendy. I talked her into it. I said, look, we'll register at the conference and then we'll duck out and kind of see this beautiful area of the world which is up in the jungle of Malaya. But on that first night, Ulrika played a game for us. We met in a hall, not quite as big as this one, and she said, right, over there's the UK, there's USA, there's Singapore, there's Malaya, there's Thailand, there's Korea, there's Philippines, there's Australia. I want you to go and stand where you spent 1953 in. Okay, 1954, where were you? 55, where were you? 56, where were you? Move to the country where you spent most of that year. The whole room was a mass of continually moving people. We had no stability, no permanence. Friends just moved in and out without warning. Families were interrupted, reshaped, separated, reformed, and every 3 or 4 years, each family returned to their home country for furlough. After that game, I saw clearly that I had seen one of those rail tracks that had shaped me. I knew I had stumbled upon something of incredible importance to me. One extraordinary feature of the conference was that in many ways there was great similarity between us. We all had missionary parents. We'd all been sent to school from 5 or 6. We'd all been in a very strong evangelical mission organisation. Up until at least age 17. Of course, we'd changed a bit since then. But as I looked at people, it had the feeling of being in Maya. You know, when you're buying some clothes and you go into the change room and you're looking at yourself and then you think, who's that other guy? And, oh, there's a mirror over there. Oh, gee, I don't look like that, do I? And then you look around behind you and there's this really bald guy. Oh. The conference was like that. In every person, I saw something of myself, and they in turn saw themselves in me. Details of what they saw are within the book. Each of us carried the mark of our childhoods. Most of us had been damaged. There had been deaths, too many, from suicide, trauma, drugs. Relationship difficulties had been very common. Sexual abuse occurred after my time there, with horrific outcomes for those boys involved. There were many psychiatric conditions, rather more than I would expect in the general population. One of the counsellors said to me afterwards that for her it was a scene of carnage. Can I go on a little bit more about my own personal story? When Mum and Dad sent me to Chifu, they had told me about Isaac being placed on the altar and offered as a sacrifice to God. They had told me about Samuel, the Old Testament prophet, who was born to his parents after infertility as well. And his parents then sent him to temple school at a young age. Uh-oh. They told me that going away from them was my part in reaching the lost souls of Asia for Jesus. I was on board with that. At 5, I was praying for every mission by name in their boarding stations through Thailand, in their mission stations through Thailand. Looking back, I can see that I was indeed made complicit in the breakup of our family. As I said, throughout my life, I'd always said, yeah, that was tough, but hey, look, I've turned out okay, life's been good. I had no damage. At the age of 5 then, I left Mum and Dad in Bangkok and travelled for 3 days, 2 nights, by train and taxi to get to Chifu down the Malay Peninsula. In 1959, the school was in a beautiful old English bungalow, which was called imaginatively the bungalow. Within a few weeks of arriving there, I reached the conclusion that somehow a terrible mistake had happened. I wanted my mum and dad. So I wrapped myself in my cardigan, got my water bottle, and set out for Thailand. I got as far as the school gates, which were stone pillar gates. And the surrounding jungle started to press in. You couldn't see anything but jungle. And there was the noise of cicadas and strange animals and stories of tigers, and there was just the end of the Malay Rebellion, and so there were stories of insurgents with machine guns. I hid beside the stone pillar on the right side and wept. And 2 hours later, defeated, I walked back into the school. Then I just locked the whole episode away. That's just too hard to deal with. Just put it away. And I went back and enjoyed school. I don't think I ever really felt sad very much again. So now, let's come back to 2014, to this conference that we were at. On the Tuesday of that week, all of us walked over the mountain through the jungle trail that we had been there right back from the 50s. We walked from the site of what was the new Chifu school to the bungalow. It was now a holiday home for missionaries. As we came down out of the jungle onto the road, and can I say, Wendy has beautifully pictured that event in that middle picture there. That sense of togetherness, of helping each other, of seeking new direction, was something Wendy just captured so beautifully. As we came down at that point, I looked across and saw those stone gates. I wept. I was broken open by being there again. I had no idea I was carrying that pain. No idea that seeing those gates once more was actually what I needed to be made whole. Healing didn't happen straight away. The whole group of us bonded together remarkably, and using Facebook, we stayed in touch and supported each other as we each tried to find our way forward. It was not until the third of the conferences held at the school, which was in 2018, that I found release. In the years between, I'd spent a lot of time trying to understand what had happened and why. I'd managed to unlock and drain the buried sadness from those multiple farewells. But the big problem I wrestled with was this. My parents were superb, all out for God Christians. I have no doubt about that. Why did God not protect us? Was he even there? Ulrika Ernvik was a speaker at the third conference. She suggested that many of us had indeed been traumatised, and these days they're talking about complex PTSD. Children cope with trauma by seeking their carer. If there is no one there, children freeze and then back away, and they internalise the trauma. Neurological pathways are set up with great emotional power. Ulrika undertook to work with me to try and rework the memory that I had of that running away day. The principle of the therapy is to revisit the memory, to feel again the bodily sensations of that day, to hear the crunching of the gravel drive as I walked down it, and then invite someone safe to come into the memory. So, together, we walked down the memory of that day. I crouched outside that stone gate, feeling cold, despairing, so sad. I said to Ulrika, I don't know who I can ask to come in here. My parents sent me here, and God's become unbelievable to me. She said, let's sit here for a while and see who comes. Okay. So we sat. I knew I'd find this hard. Then my mum came round the bend. She held me tight and said she loved me, that she'd not understood how painful this was for me being sent away. We returned to Thailand right away, and our family would go home to Australia as soon as possible. The relief I felt, and I feel still, gives me goosebumps. I saw that one of the hidden tracks of this 5-year-old boy was that in being sent away, being less important than God's work, I was unsure whether I was worth loving. Lancing that emotional boil was such a relief. I knew Mum loved me. And immediately I knew that God loved me. Now that story is part of my contribution to our book. That sense of not being loved enough to keep is a common thread in our other stories. We could not compete with God. 2 years ago, we decided that our stories of damage to children needed to be heard. Sending children away is not God's will. It's not just in Catholic churches that children are being hurt, or were being hurt. Thus our book was conceived, and after a long gestation, it's launched here today. We have 42 authors who, in their own words, answered our questions. How did such a childhood affect your life then and now? The stories are in their own words, and we drew no conclusions. We are not into blaming or finding fault. We just wanted to tell it truly. Yet there is a cumulative power in truth that speaks without words. I want to conclude with some theological thoughts because we're in a church and it seemed appropriate. I know there are people both watching and maybe here tonight for whom these thoughts may not be relevant. Paul Young, the author of the book The Shack. Many of you read that? The Shack? Yeah, it's a very thought-provoking book. He was a speaker at the second Chief Who Reconsidered conference. He wrote our foreword for the book when I asked him to, and it is one of the most remarkable pieces in the book. I was stunned when I read it because in his own journey, he had come to similar conclusions as I had. Let me try and summarise this as best I can. Number one, over a long time, say centuries, a wrong direction of only 1% will end up in significant deviation. Could this have happened to evangelical beliefs? It certainly did to the Catholic Church. That's why the Reformation occurred, I think. 2, God did not want us to be sacrificed by our parents. In fact, he clearly says he doesn't want sacrifices. 3, where did our evangelical concept of sacrifice come from? I remember my mum used to quote right to the end of her life, "What? You would give God that which cost you nothing?" If you think about it, our whole Western social culture is also deeply underlaid with the concept of heroic sacrifice for another. Where's that from? That question took me a long way back. But then I realised that the image of a Father God sending his Son to be tortured to death to deal with the sin of mankind and of each individual has been understood in our culture on the basis of a theory particularly developed by Anselm in the 10th century. He tried to explain the meaning of what happened on the cross, and the term penal substitutionary atonement became the central paradigm for theology until the last 100 years. I'm not saying that he was wrong in the slightest, but is it possible that our culture has mistaken in some way the place to put emphasis? That somehow we've missed a bigger picture of what Jesus' death and resurrection meant. Now look, I know that, in evangelical circles, we talk very strongly that we are saved by grace. It's not anything we do. It's not something you earn. But we've somehow also developed a picture of a judging, severe, even angry Father God, which is false. Have we lost a concept of the way God loves us all, with unspeakable love? Somehow, despite the Reformation principle that God saves us freely without cost, evangelical culture has made serving God a measurable sacrifice, something that should cost. So, at the start of this talk, I said that hopefully there'd be thoughts that you could take away. I hope you see now why I said that. It's not often that we can see over a lifetime the end result of an experiment. Now, to be honest, I'd feel really embarrassed to have stood up here and said what I've just said, because I'm not a theologian, and there's been theologians who've spent their entire lives wrangling over some of the issues that I've touched on. And I do not in any way suggest that what they got wrong, I, John Chenoweth, have seen right. No, that can't be. But there are a number of other writers now saying things something like that. Paul Young, for one. And just before I ask Melissa to read something from Paul Young's foreword, I just want to say thank you so much to her for reading to us in such a beautiful way. And I look forward to this reading. Thank you.
Paul Young, in his foreword, writes these words. In Isaiah, God says, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. In Amos he says, take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps I will not listen. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ hates sacrifice. The story of Abraham and Isaac was not about a test to see if Abraham still made God his number one priority, competing with children for attention. Rather, I am not a God who will ever require the sacrifice of children, ever. And since you are stuck inside a delusion of self-hatred that requires a sacrifice that someone must pay, let me reveal to you my name and character. I will provide myself. Today, a goat with its head caught in a crown of thorns, and one day I will be the lamb you think you need. And by that submission to you, together, we will finally and forever end sacrifice. How scandalous that this God needs nothing. Did our parents intend to harm us? Did they understand how the turning of their faces away from their children was not an act of God or godliness? Did the mission comprehend the damage their mandates would effect as they rippled through the tender hearts of children? Was this God's will? The cost of doing evangelizing? No, 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 and no. What seems a small price to pay to an adult thinking God thoughts is undeniably costly to the little ones named small price. And yet, the redeeming genius crawled inside all these mixed motives and intentions, both the darkness and the light, and blessed with life anything that was still of love's kind, and now continues to work within the ripples to redeem everything. Because of the sacrifices made, many did hear about the love named Jesus. But the ends don't justify the means, ever. There is no justification for a cross or the sacrifice of children. There is, however, redemption. This broad spectrum is held inside the pages that you now hold.
I just wanted to say thank you all for coming as we come to conclusion. It's always seemed to me that with the run of anti-church things happening in our culture, there is just a possibility that God is saying, hey guys, come back here, come back, you're off the track. Just stop it. Return to me, because I really love you. I'm deeply honoured that you came here tonight and have listened to me without throwing tomatoes or anything. I hope that I've given you something to think about, and I'll say that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you to John for sharing of himself and his personal stories. Thank you to Melissa for her wonderful reading. Thank you to Wendy for the wonderful artwork. Many people in my congregation know what a fan I am of Wendy's artwork from what I have seen. It's worth checking her out on her website. I invite you now, as we close, to just go taking these stories, the stories you've heard, the stories you may read in the book, chew them over, walk for a little while in the shoes of those little children going through the gates of a school in a jungle so far from home. And I think we can take the words of John as theologian, because he is a theologian and a very fine one, and listen to what we are learning. I invite you to consider how the image of the God we worship has the power to lay unbearable burdens on so many little ones that they have trouble bearing through life. Or, if we behold the face of God as the face of love, that can protect, affirm, and set them free to be themselves. So we have heard some theology tonight, we have heard some human stories tonight, and there are many more to read and encounter in the books. The way we are going to do the rest of the evening now, you will be invited to exit out the front or the side, and John will be here signing some books, and the books will also be available for sale. We have an opportunity also to grab, there's some pretty amazing delicacies have been gathered into some little recyclable boxes. So for $10 you can get a beverage of your choice and a box of remarkable things to eat with that beverage. And a chance to stand around, to talk, to maybe talk to John, to talk to others, and just chew over what we have heard tonight. So thank you. I'll add my thanks to you as well for coming, for being here, for sharing in what I think has been a pretty precious evening. And I thank all those who presented again. There is a tap machine to purchase for the $10 for the food and drink. Cash is possible as well, but to make it easy, we put a tap machine, and John will explain how the book sales will work, or his lovely assistants will explain how the book sales will work there too. Thank you. I hope to see you outside.